This week from the Global Lane. On the home front, big changes at Foggy Bottom and Langley. How Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State and the first woman to head the CIA may change the world. Where in the world Africa? Sinner or saint? This woman brought medical care to tens of thousands in Africa and was hailed as a hero. But she died with a dark and disturbing secret from her European past. Love and marriage in India. Like their American counterparts, some young people there are now abandoning centuries of family tradition. We'll set it straight on America's great political and social divide. Are we becoming a nation of tribes? And I'll drive it home on Trump's firing of the Secretary of State. Bye-bye, Rex, we barely knew you. And it's all right here, right now, from the Global Lane. President Trump's decision to make a change at Foggy Bottom will definitely change global policies pursued by the United States. If confirmed, Secretary of State Tillerson's replacement, CIA Director Mike Pompeo, will likely take a harder line against America's competitors and adversaries around the world. Pompeo is a Christian and a passionate supporter of Israel. He'll start his new position just as President Trump prepares for high-stakes talks with North Korea. National security correspondent Eric Rosales brings us the outlook at the State Department.
President Trump, citing ongoing disagreements, led the decision to choose a new Secretary of State. The president pointed specifically to areas including North Korea diplomacy, steel and aluminum tariffs, and the Iran nuclear agreement.
I actually got along well with Rex, but really it was a different mindset. It was a different thinking.
As Tillerson gave a timeline for his departure, he addressed State Department accomplishments, adding more work needs to be done, specifically with Russia, China, and Syria.
I'll now return to private life as a private citizen, as a proud American, proud of the opportunity I've had to serve my country. God bless all of you. God bless the American people.
The man to replace Tillerson, Mike Pompeo, will face a confirmation process from the same senators who voted to confirm him as CIA director. Pompeo, a West Point graduate and former congressman, is a fierce critic of the Iran nuclear deal and strong supporter of Israel. Also known as a devout Christian, Pompeo is a member of the White House Bible study. President Trump is an outspoken fan of Pompeo, who personally briefs the commander-in-chief on a regular basis.
We're always on the same wavelength. The relationship has been very good, and that's what I need as Secretary of State.
On Capitol Hill, Senator Marco Rubio, who voted for Tillerson despite objections to his Russia ties, called Pompeo an excellent choice.
I know him very well. He's uniquely positioned and prepared, and I think he'll be a great Secretary of State. I'll be an enthusiastic supporter.
Democrats paint a different picture.
There's a difference between being a CIA director, which is about exerting covert activities throughout the world and gathering intelligence, and the art of diplomacy. And he has to show us that he can exhibit those skills.
Betnam Ben Talablu of the Foundation for Defense Democracies hopes the administration capitalizes on the timing. He adds the shuffling taking place at Foggy Bottom could be positive for U.S. diplomacy.
I think if there is any diplomacy between the U.S. and North Korea, it must be, again, on American terms, and we must share the definition of denuclearization. We can't have one definition in Washington and one definition in Pyongyang. And Pompeo, to me at least, strikes me as the kind of person who would want to stick to that definition.
The president's move opens the door for CIA long-timer Gina Haspel, who, if confirmed, would become the first woman to lead the spy agency. This is a person who's actually been able to work her way up from the ground up, and she started off as a CIA agent, and she's worked her way through the administration, and she is one who has the support of the men and women of the CIA. I'm hearing that a lot of people actually are ecstatic about her becoming the next leader for the CIA, and that's something very good for the agency. As we know, the agency has had its black eyes over the years, and this is something where she can actually bring some real change. And it's great to see a woman in the top position there. You know, as we all know, Hillary Clinton had recently said that President Trump actually hates women and degrades them and doesn't put them in any position of power. So this is just an example of how the left again was wrong on a situation like this once again.
The president wanted this change at Foggy Bottom and CIA, a new team prior to his late spring face-to-face meeting with Kim Jong-un. So why Pompeo, and what kind of change is the president looking for?
Well, this is actually a very good change, and the timing of it couldn't have been any better. I mean, we're dealing with tariffs right now. We're dealing with North Korea and the negotiations that are taking place with North Korea. That is something that Tillerson was never on the table with when we looked at this. Tillerson always had odds for months with President Trump over the North Korea and the handling of that situation. And Pompeo is just a tremendous pick, and it's a tremendous pick for evangelical Christians as well. I mean, he is very pro-Israel. He was spoke out against the Iran nuclear deal. This is just a real good pick for President Trump.
And a very devout Christian, I might add. He's definitely a friend of Israel, so how do you think that is going to affect peace talks and negotiations, and especially the whole Jerusalem move of the embassy and so forth? You know,
getting back to Israel and the Israeli government, Pompeo is the type of individual who can really bring a stance there. He is actually, it was just last February where he actually spoke at met with Palestinian President Abbas and told him about trying to get negotiations with Israel. He's also spoken out at a number of Israeli organizations, one of which was a dinner last November. It was Our Soldiers Speak. That is where they actually, a nonprofit organization that brings Israeli soldiers. And he talked about the importance there of bringing Israeli United States together and continue to keep our strong allies together in order to bring an end to this tyranny that's taking place against the Israeli people.
And I know the president has always said that he felt this nuclear deal with Iran was the worst deal the United States has ever negotiated. I think Pompeo thinks the same way.
Yes, he does.
What do you know about that?
No, he had actually said that that the nuclear deal was a bad deal for the United States. It actually only favored Iran and favored the increase of nuclear arms in the area, and that is actually something that President Trump wants to get a hold of.
How about Russia? How might Pompeo at state affect relations with Putin? I know he favored the economic sanctions against Russia.
He did favor the economic sanctions against Russia. We have, especially with Vladimir Putin just recently talking about his hypersonic missile that can end up hitting the United States. This is something that has been very tough for the United States to swallow. But at the same time, Tillerson has just been kind of just sitting back and not necessarily even dealing with this Russia incident. And Pompeo will actually be able to go directly to Putin and deal with him.
When we think of missionaries and medical professionals called to help the people of Africa, we often think of Christian heroes of the faith, like Dr. David Livingstone. But there have been countless others, many whose stories you probably haven't heard, but people who have truly made a big difference in changing African lives. One such person was Dr. Ann Sparry. Joining us now is John Hemingway, a filmmaker and a writer, author of a new book, In Full Flight, A Story of Africa and Atonement. Many have not heard the story of Dr. Ann Sparry, a French doctor, and how she saved many lives from fatal diseases while she resided in Africa. So how did you encounter her and document her story?
Well, I first met her in 1980. I was a freelance writer, hanging out in Africa to a great degree, and she seemed to be the perfect profile I needed. She was extremely brave. She flew her own plane. She was in her early 60s at the time, and she just was unstoppable. She helped all the tribal people, particularly in the north and along the coast and by Lake Victoria, and her output was just beyond comprehension. She would land on tiny little strips, and there'd be a bunch of warriors, their wives, their kids waiting for her in the shade under an acacia tree. And we'd go and we'd set up a card table, all these medications on the card table, and I'd stand as her faithful acolyte as she treated all these people.
Now, after she passed away, you find out something unique about her. What was that, and how significant was it to her work and friendship with the locals?
Well, she died in 1999, and she was then close to 80, close to 81. And I set out to write a loving biography of hers. Her funeral was virtually a state funeral in Kenya. She was beloved by so many people. 1,000 people showed up in her hangar in Nairobi. And so I set out to write perhaps a conventional biography of a woman who was as close to sainthood as I could imagine. And it was then I started getting into research in Europe that the entire story took a dramatic turn. Anne and her brother, members of a prosperous family from Alsace in France, were both in the French resistance, in the French underground. And in 1943, Anne was caught by the Germans. She was put into detention, and eventually she was put into a cattle car and shipped off to this dreaded concentration camp in Germany called Ravensbrück, for women only. Something like 123,000 women went through it. Only 18,000 at the very most survived. And it was during that time when Anne essentially became a different person. It happened over a period of 4 months, a critical 4 months that in fact informed the entire rest of her life. It was in what they call Block 10, which was for tuberculars and for lunatics. And she was in charge of this whole thing, along with the block elder, another prisoner who was, I would have to say, one of the most duplicitous, possibly evil, but provocative women in all history. I mean, she was extraordinary. Her name was Carmen Mori, and Anne fell under her dominion. And between the two of them, they made a pact, essentially, with the Nazi overlords to do all sorts of I have to say, atrocities that was in complete violation. Here was this young woman who was a medical student, and she was seeking her license. She wanted to practice medicine and help poor people the rest of her life. And for 4 months, she did exactly the reverse.
What do you want people to learn from reading your book?
Well, I'd like people to reflect on where we are today in our world, where we are today in terms of cover-ups, where we are today in terms of what we can do to turn our lives around. And I believe that this is one of the most Herculean, Olympic, life-changing careers of all times. And I would say that we can learn a lot from Anne and what she achieved, because it is an act of personal will that, as far as I'm concerned, has very few equals.
And it's never too late, is it?
Never too late.
Never too late. John Hemingway, author of a new book, In Full Flight, A Story of Africa and Atonement. Thank you, Mr. Hemingway, for sharing this amazing story with us today. Fewer young Americans today embrace marriage and the importance of shouldering family responsibilities. But in India, young people value marriage, but many face religious influences and economic expectations that often hinder them from seeking true love. Joining us is Elizabeth Flock. She's a PBS reporter and author of the new book, The Heart is a Shifting Sea, Love and Marriage in Mumbai. Thank you for joining us, Elizabeth. So what's unique about the younger generation today in India compared to, say, young Americans?
There's certain things that are, of course, the same, and we live in such a globalized world that the images that we see play out in the media, online, are the same images that young Indian people see. The characters in my book, the people in the book are, they watch the TV show Friends. They might draw Jennifer Lawrence if they're drawing. They are exposed to the same culture in many ways, and yet at the same time, are living in a very different cultural context. Older traditions do still persist and there is a very rule-bound culture. Some of those rules are not necessarily legal, but are more covert and just sort of enforced by tradition.
Now they still have arranged marriages there, don't they? Does religion influence India still?
Yeah, arranged marriages still make up about 60 to 90% of marriages in India. There's no great statistics on that, but that's what that believe. So that's the vast majority. Certainly, religion comes into play. Interfaith marriages, marrying someone from an opposite religion, is still very stigmatized, and many parents do not want their kids marrying someone from a different religion. So many arranged marriages are marrying someone who's also Hindu or who's also Muslim.
Are we seeing more Hindus and Christians intermarry, Muslims also in India compared to the past?
There definitely is more intermarriage. There are more young people saying that they're going to go against their parents' wishes and have interfaith marriages, but that can have very bad consequences. There are still honor killings where people kill a woman who's getting married to someone, or the person she's marrying, for marrying across religious boundaries. When I lived in Mumbai, I remember one family held a mock funeral for their daughter because she was Hindu and marrying someone who was Muslim.
Wow, that's amazing. Also, I guess if they marry outside their caste?
Yeah, absolutely. The caste system is not as sort of talked about openly as it once was, but it still does play a role, especially in religion. One of the couples in my book, the woman Parvati loved a Christian boy, and he was not a Brahmin, which she was, which is of the highest caste, and her parents absolutely said that she could not marry him because he was not another Brahmin. And so they said, you can choose who you want, but he has to be another Hindu and he has to be another Brahmin.
So even though they may say, okay, you can marry outside your faith, don't marry outside the Brahmin caste.
Yeah, usually those things are together. So parents have those religious boundaries and caste boundaries, and these online marriage apps that people use and marriage sites to have arranged marriages have kind of replaced the older relying on family to do arranged marriages, but the family is very involved in this online marriage site. And on those marriage sites, they ask you questions about what is your religion, what is your caste, how much money are you making, what skin color do you have disabilities? There's a million questions that people have to answer to try to fit certain parameters.
Now, in your book, you used one family to demonstrate how the instability of economics may determine the future of one's destiny.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much economic change in addition to social and cultural change in India right now. I mean, people are so upwardly mobile. The middle class is certainly growing. And, as people get more money, perhaps there is a bit more moral freedom about what they can do. But there is still very much, even in the middle class, even as people, move up the economic ladder and get more money, there still is a lot of these rules about who you can and cannot love. And finances and personal finances play a role in marriage as well. You're only, your parents are looking for you to marry someone who makes more money than you do. And so those kind of negotiations about how much you make, how much your partner is going to make is very much a part of the process in arranged marriages.
So what's the attitude towards marriage today in India? Is it changing? I know in America, we're seeing a lot of millennials and younger people forego marriage. Some are delaying it because of career and so forth. How's it changing in India?
Rural India very much is more tradition bound, but certainly in cities where you have a increasingly progressive young generation, we're seeing some of the same changes. There are more women having premarital sex, having sex outside of marriage. And that is increasing, although that's probably a very small number that's increasing. Most people are still getting married. They are still having arranged marriages. They are still sticking with those marriages, even if they're unhappy. But the divorce rate certainly is rising. Okay,
Elizabeth Flock, we appreciate you giving us some insights and a look into marriage in India. You're author of the new book, The Heart is a Shifting Sea, Love and Marriage in Mumbai. Thanks for joining us, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
After the mass shooting at a Florida high school, gun control efforts gain new momentum. Florida recently enacted tougher gun restrictions into law, and some rather loud voices and demonstrations from student activists may have made the difference. Amy Tra is a professor of law at Yale Law School. She's author of the book Political Tribes, Group Instinct, and the Fate of Nations. Professor Tra, thanks for joining us. So why did you use the word tribe in your book title? What are you suggesting?
Well, human beings are very tribal. That's just, we're hardwired to want to belong to groups, and that can be fine. Sports groups, church groups, family. The problem is when tribalism takes over the political system. And that's what we're starting to see today, because once people connect to a tribe, you want to cling to it and defend it no matter what. And you also start seeing everything through the lens of your group. And facts start not to matter. For example, with the shootings, the mourning of the children, the victims, was barely over when suddenly both sides of the political spectrum retreated into their tribes, started to call each other names, and that little bit of progress, that we're trying to make often is just stopped.
I've been reporting for over 40 years now, and I've never seen anything quite like this, covering politics and so forth. It seems that younger Americans especially are seeking identities through multiple social media platforms. So how significant is that in influencing their behavior and their political activism?
It's extremely significant, along with cable news. What's happening is that Americans, there used to be a much more of an overlap between even Republicans and Democrats. They would have more similar views on immigration, on religion, all kinds of things. But right now, everything is much more extreme. For example, the Democrats' views on immigration is way more extreme. The Republicans is extreme at the other end. And the young people, when they go onto social media, they basically just pick people that have their views already. And they get ads about things, about movies and books that are already their point of view. So they just get more and more entrenched. And often, in order to get the most likes or the most clicks, it's not good to just come up with a moderate, reasonable point of view. Look, we are playing with fire here. Sometimes it might just feel good to make the other side feel bad, but we're really talking about our country and whether America can stay America.
It seems like there isn't dialogue anymore and reasoned, gentlemanly debate.
I think it's extremely important that we be able to talk to each other. Right now, we're at the point where we see people who voted for the other side, not just as people we disagree with, that we want to debate with and argue with, but instead as immoral people, evil enemies, not American, or people of different religions can have their religious identities flourish, and yet they can still be American. And that's what we need to get back to. We don't need to choose. It's not like we need to, force assimilation and not let these subgroups flourish. We have the formula, we have the apparatus, but it's just that there's a lot of hostility right now, and people almost don't want to reach out to the other side.
Yeah, I can't help but think that social media has aggravated a lot of this and has caused this polarization, all these multitude of voices. So how is all this likely to affect the fate of the American nation then in the years ahead? You and I know a nation divided cannot stand. So what do you think?
I think we need more voices like perhaps yours, and I actually think they're often quieter, the wiser voices. Actually, I think that religious groups can often do a lot if they can be a bridge, and other voluntary associations that America has always had so many of that would be cross-cutting. That is an organization that isn't just all one race or all one political party or all one view about immigration. And we're getting to that point where people are just separating into two rigid camps.
And we're all Americans, are we not?
We are.
Yes.
As an immigrant's daughter, my parents love this country. They were liberated by Americans in the Second World War in the Philippines. And, they just want to get back. I mean, we're a minority, but it was always like, this was the country that gave us opportunity. We love the values of the Constitution. It's the values of the Constitution and just humanity that really should unite this country, not these subgroup identities. And so we do need to, I think we all need to elevate ourselves. All of us can be very angry at different points. And I think we have to, even individually, have the will to say, you know what, I'm going to try to see this other person as a human being, as a fellow American.
And I think we need more professors like you. So thank you, Amy Trua. Thanks for your insights today.
Thank you so much for having me.
President Trump has fired his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and to that, I say good riddance. On China, North Korea, Israel, and Iran, Tillerson resisted the president's agenda every step of the way and even worked to undermine the president's policies. Tillerson opposed the moving of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a law, by the way, enacted by the U.S. Congress nearly 20 years ago. Well, he said such a move would endanger American diplomats in the Middle East and undermine the Palestinian peace process. Mr. Secretary, do you really think this president would endanger American lives and fail to send help like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton did when Ambassador Chris Stevens came under attack at Benghazi? Remember that? As for undermining the peace process, the Palestinian leadership has done a pretty good job of that one over the years. So, Mr. Tillerson, I know you've only served as Secretary of State for about a year, but I really can't think of anything that you've accomplished that distinguishes you from your predecessors, except maybe your stacking of the State Department with anti-Trump bureaucrats. On Iran, you've worked hard to keep the United States committed to that Iran nuclear deal, even though this president still believes it's the worst agreement ever negotiated by the United States. So why would you work against the president with our European allies and others when you know he wants out of that Obama-Kerry deal? American voters have grown tired of globalist agreements that favor everyone but the people of the United States. That's one reason why they elected Donald Trump president. If voters don't like what Trump does, they won't re-elect him. But if any cabinet member finds they just can't support the president's views, then they need to leave. You, Mr. Tillerson, didn't do either. So the president was forced to fire you.
I actually got along well with Rex, but really it was a different mindset. It was a different thinking.
Tillerson really didn't take a tough stance against Russia, and he even soft-pedaled the president's fire and fury warning to North Korea. Remember that one? But the president will meet face-to-face with Rocket Man Un sometime this spring. That historic development is because of Trump, not Tillerson. It was also rumored that Tillerson once privately called the president a moron. If that's true, shame on him. If he truly believed that, then he should have resigned long ago. Why did he continue to work for someone that he believed to be a moron? Guess what? That so-called moron has America's back, not some globalist agenda. And that's why some polls show that he's more popular right now with the American public than Barack Obama was at this time of his presidency. And last time I checked, Donald Trump is still president. Tillerson, he'll be unemployed at the end of March. So, Mr. Tillerson, thank you for serving your country. I respect you for that and all you've accomplished in business, but not in your role as Secretary of State, not in the way you worked against your boss, the President of the United States. So bye-bye. God be with you as you go. Your office will be in good hands with Mike Pompeo. Well, that's it from the Global Lane this week. Be sure to catch us on Facebook, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Twitter. And until next time, be blessed.